I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the murder of JonBenét Ramsey, a case that's been talked about and dissected for years, but hasn't really been completely investigated. And as a result, it has not been solved. Here's the story. It's the highest profile unsolved case in the nation. It's been the subject of many theories and investigations, none of which have resulted in a successful arrest. On December 26, 1996, 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey was found dead in her family's home in Boulder, Colorado. Her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, had reported her missing early that morning. Patsy Ramsey found a lengthy handwritten ransom note in the house addressed to her husband, John. About 7 hours after police arrived to investigate the kidnapping, JonBenét's body was found hidden beneath a latched door in the basement of the home by her father, John. And now there is renewed interest in the case by Boulder PD and the public looking to solve the case. Meanwhile, someone who was once a person of interest in the investigation, convicted pedophile Gary Oliva, has been released from prison and talked to his high school classmate, Michael Vale, on video about JonBenét. That video revealing some bizarre moments and statements by Oliva. Will Boulder police put him back on the radar as the search for JonBenét's killer continues? This video that was recorded by Michael Vale it's shocking, it's bizarre, it's really strange in moments, but I would argue also revealing to a certain extent. I want to show you more of this video. Now, Michael Vale went to high school with Gary Oliva, and they kept in contact through the years, and there was a phone call that was made around the time of the murder, just after the murder. And since that time, Michael got very interested in the result, in what happened to JonBenét and with Gary still walking free, and was wondering why no one was listening to him. So just recently, he recorded this video in speaking with him. But in this part, what I want you to see, what I want you to look at is what he has constructed in this room where Michael has recorded this video. It's an altar to JonBenét. Take a look.
I'm prostrating.
Whoa, that seemed violent.
Sorry about that. I prostrate.
You look like you were flipping on the floor. Oh, yeah. Well, that was beautiful.
Because Johnny's beautiful. The horses are important in this next verse.
Okay.
These horses.
For the altar.
Altar.
Shrine.
It's just,
shoot.
It mentions horses in the next. So, sometimes we ride on your horses. Sometimes we walk alone. Sometimes the songs we hear are the songs of our own. Anytime I found anything that had horses, I would make shrines. I've done so many of these shrines. Look at how it all came together, remember? In what? In no time, remember?
Yeah.
We put an altar together with outside stuff, all local. A piece of bread. I took a bite of it.
And that's like an offering, the
That's
bread.
a food offering.
Okay.
I'm probably doing it backwards by Buddhist standards. You're not supposed to eat the food.
I told you, this is off the wall part of this. And it brings us to the first question of our investigation, which is, what does this altar tell us about Gary Oliva? What can we take away from this behavior and this praying to JonBenét, a food offering? Joining me tonight to help us through all this, in studio, childhood friend of Gary Oliva, the man who recorded these videos, of Oliva. Michael Vale is with us. Also with us, private investigator with more than 20 years of experience, has followed this case for the nonprofit, the Cold Case Coalition, Jason Jensen. And also joining us, I requested him, clinical and forensic psychologist, researcher, expert on violent crime, and author of The New Evil, Dr. Gary Brucato is with us. Welcome to all of you. Michael, let me begin with you first so we can get a little more background here. Where is this all being recorded, number one, and what was the story in the building of this altar? Where did these pieces come from?
Well, first of all, they're altars. He calls them shrines or dedications, okay? So what he does is he walks through the streets of Denver, the gutters of Denver, and he walks in a straight line. And whatever he finds in his path, JonBenét put that in there for him to build a shrine. So he'll find little toy horses. He'll find a child's shoe or a root that looks like a J, right? And that's, JonBenét gave that to him, a little heart-shaped rock. And then he goes and he gets a motel room. And then he builds the shrine. Now, he's done this hundreds and hundreds of times.
So it's not just for the video that he did. This is something that he
does this
regularly.
Constantly. I would say every 3-4 days, perhaps.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Or more often. Hold
on, Jason. You know, I've got to ask Dr. Gary Brucato about this. Dr. Gary Brucato, I mean, I'm just going to leave an open-ended question. Like, we just saw all this. What is going through your mind right now?
Well, as somebody who has always specialized in the crossover between psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, which is a diagnosis that Mr. Oliva carries, reports, and violence, I can tell you that there is nothing about that wouldn't be consistent with somebody with a... It's certainly bizarre and has a very idiosyncratic quality, but in the mind of an individual like that, there is always some kind of premise or meaning that is totally unique to them that would be very difficult to understand from. What strikes me about the altar is that I happen to know from previous public discussions with Jason and Michael that one of the things in the content of the letters that Mr. Is a preoccupation with the idea of eating JonBenét, that there is a spiritual significance to eating her. And I think we have to understand the version of the Christian concept of the Eucharist, the idea being that one becomes one with the divinity of the person being eaten, like we do with Christ in Catholicism, for example, in doing that with this child in his mind. And so the altar is totally consistent with that. So the idea seems to be that this individual's particular delusional system involves the idea of making a permanent part of himself by communing with her and possibly even eating her. I think Michael might want to pick up on that. That is a preoccupation for Mr. Oliva, the ingestion of the child.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. I want to play one more thing though first, because something else happened in that room, and someone knocks on the door. Watch the reaction of Gary Oliva when that happens. Let's take a look.
Oh, what the? Was it loud?
No, it's just some derelict. You're cool. They got the wrong door. They just got the wrong door. They ran away.
Okay, interesting moment there. What happened right there, Michael?
Somebody had walked by the room and Gary freaked out. And that had been happening all that day. He wanted the window closed. He didn't want people seeing this.
All right. Jason, do you have a theory on what's going on here with him?
I do. I've seen all the videos, and I know from conversations I've had with Michael about admissions from Gary, one of the things that I feel, you know, as a criminologist, is that he's struggling with her death. Like Michael said last night, that Gary feels remorse over the loss, the death. So he is troubled by that. By keeping her alive through a shrine or an altar and talking to her in a first-person sense, he's keeping her alive as a coping skill so he doesn't have to deal with her death.
And did you want to follow up on what Dr. Gary Procado was talking about, the consuming of JonBenét?
Well, yes. I mean, he has mentioned that, yes, he wanted to eat JonBenét. He was going to take her out of the home and eat her.
And does he say that in retrospect, like the concept of JonBenét, or was your interpretation like that day back when she was killed?
Well, he had been sending me a lot of art about how he would cook JonBenét on a spit and turn the spit over a fire. And he mentioned that the great thing about the spit is that it also destroys any evidence and burns up the bones.
Wow. Strange stuff. Strange stuff. But he didn't say any of that on the video.
No.
He didn't. Okay. Coming up next, this is an important question because he's been released from prison. Is Gary Oliva dangerous?
I married a rock star. Oh, no, it's not funny.
A Ponzi scheme and a deadly poisoning.
A former pharmacist already convicted in a federal fraud case.
Now stands trial for the murder of her husband.
The financial crime gives rise to murder.
Did Natalie Cochran kill to cover up other crimes?
We're not here to obtain convictions. We're here to obtain the truth.
Now a jury will decide her fate, and Court TV will bring you every minute.
The Ponzi scheme murder trial. Live coverage begins next week, only on Court TV. Now.
Why did little Britney Spears, little Taylor Swift, why did she get her chance?
Yeah, I mean, she would have definitely gone on to...
Look at what she did by the age of 6. When one's so pure, has something happen, so to lose her life with so much ahead, so much. Look at what you got. You made it. You're here. This life is here. And there it is. Look, and you love it. You love the attention. And all of a sudden it stopped. Damn.
And 28 years later, than ever.
I married a rock star. Oh, no, it's not funny.
Now, when he says he married a rock star, he's talking about JonBenét Ramsey. And he keeps, every time he looks over, he's looking at that altar, that shrine that he constructed inside that motel room. Now, Gary Oliva, this next part of the video that was shot by his high school classmate, Michael Vale, again, who he's had communications through the years with, this part of the video is sort of some of his ramblings. Like I said, a lot of it's bizarre, it's strange, it's different, it's not normal, right? Let's take a look.
They colorize her eyes to make them blue when her eyes are actually green. Why? Because they want to feed that image of the perfect child. All I know is this little girl is constantly harangues me. Constantly pesters me. Just like a little child would do. She's always on my no, don't litter, don't do this, don't do that. All that little childish comes from her. She's your conscience. Because she sees the world from her perfect little perspective. So naturally, no matter what I'm doing, I'm blowing out snot. I can't litter. I can't do anything without her correcting me. It too fades away.
I told you, and all of this, the way he's acting, what he's saying, what he does, this obsession with JonBenét brings me to my next question, and it's about Gary Oliva himself. Is Gary Oliva a danger? A danger to himself? A danger to Michael Vale? A danger to other children? A danger to anyone? Here in studio, the man who recorded the video, childhood friend of Gary Oliva, Michael Vale, and private investigator Jason Jensen, also with us, clinical forensic psychologist Dr. Gary Brucato. Dr. Brucato, I want to begin with you on this question, and I know it's you haven't sat down and spoken with him, but looking at behavior like this, is there a potential for danger? Is he a danger?
Well, first of all, risk assessment of an individual really does require getting into the idiosyncrasies of that particular person's mind. So it's a little difficult to say, but I would say that generally speaking, if this were an individual that had a psychotic disorder alone, psychotic people don't tend, unless they're not taking their medication or using drugs or alcohol, or have a very particular paranoid kind of delusional system, they don't tend to be as dangerous as the public thinks that they are. The trouble that you have here is that this is an individual who also has a kind of paraphilic disorder, which involves attraction to children. And the problem with that is that everything in the literature and personal experience tells me is something that really doesn't go away. And so what I think is very important is for this individual to be on the constant radar, somebody that I think would be at risk of potentially doing something like that again. And how that is tied into the question of delusional beliefs, becoming hyper-focused on a particular child, etc., is a whole other story that's going to require somebody to sit down with him and kind of weed that all out. But I do think that I think pretty much anybody would agree what we have to pay attention to is the risk to other children, because he does have a prior history for which he served time. He does also have a history, as I understand it, of assaulting his mother. So it's not like there hasn't been any history of assault. But you know, these are things that one would take into consideration. For example, did that happen when acutely psychotic and not taking treatment? Was he paranoid about her, etc.? So these are all things that would have to be taken into consideration, but I'd be most worried about the potential for other child harm.
Absolutely. Michael Vale, you spent the most time with him. You saw him in different situations. From your perspective, do you think he's a danger?
What puts me at ease is that the parole office has him under close supervision. They've got a series of photos. They have this procedure where they flash images of people to Gary. And Gary said that he says, if I'm honest with you, will you arrest me? And they said, no, go ahead, be honest. And then I asked him, well, what is your age range of people that you're attracted to? And he said, 3 to 9-year-olds. So as long as you're not a 3 to 9-year-old, I think there's smaller danger.
So let me ask you, Mike, because you've spent a lot of time, invested a lot in all of this. I mean, you traveled there to meet up with him and record these videos and everything else. What do you want to see happen here?
I'd like to make sure that no other children, you know, are harmed or hurt, or families, for that matter. I mean, that's important.
Jason, what are you noticing from Gary Oliva, and would you be concerned that he'd be a danger to Michael or anyone else?
Well, you know, I believe that most of what Gary is responsible for isn't necessarily intentional in the sense that he meant to murder somebody, although somebody died. I mean, I don't want to minimize that at all, but one of the things that we know, generally speaking, about sex offenders, the same kind that Gary is that the recidivism rates go higher when they're not being supervised, just like Dr. Brucato had said. He's being closely monitored. He checks in daily. Now,
because I remember I read a headline that, oh, they didn't know where he was, but right. they did know where he was.
Right, and if that system ever broke down, then there'd be a problem. But as long as he's checking in, as long as he's got constant supervision by his parole officer, I think he's going to be fine. But yeah, that's hit and miss after that.
He says that he's aware that he has a serious problem, and as long as he's aware of it, it helps him to control himself. And he said that hurting, what happened to JonBenét has cured him of harming other kids.
And again, that can be interpreted in many different ways. Dr. Gary Bucata, we have about 30 seconds here. I'd like to get your reaction to what Michael just said about the statement Gary told him, that, you know, since JonBenét, he's not necessarily a danger or doesn't see himself in that light.
It is possible, if the basis for what he believed, you know, says that he did, was rooted in a psychotic idea as opposed to a true kind of pedophilia, where he was acting on, you know, let's say commands or some other kind of idea, and that when the delusional system works out that he happens to not be psychotic, perhaps doesn't have that compulsion. But if this is a true paraphilic disorder, that is not something that tends to go away. One might get turned off, one might be less interested, whatever. But the fact of the matter is that that is something that would always be of concern to somebody who was trying to make sure there was no risk here. He would have to be constantly monitored in the way that Jason tells us he is being.
Okay, we've got a lot more to get to, folks, and we want to do some analysis. So coming up next, what does Gary Oliva's body language reveal? We'll bring in our experts. I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the murder of JonBenét Ramsey, a young girl murdered in her own home in Boulder, Colorado. A case that always seemed very solvable, but because of attitudes, opinions, and a botched crime scene, remains a mystery. Here's the story. On the morning of December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey found an odd handwritten note. She started to read it, and quickly she was horrified. It was a ransom note for her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét. She called out for her husband, John. When they did not find JonBenét in her bedroom, they called 911. What happened over the next 7 hours was more than unusual. The home was not sealed off, and people were walking all over the crime scene in the home. Then, John Ramsey was asked to go through the house again, and that's when he found his daughter dead in the crevices of the basement. Suddenly, this case went from a kidnapping to the highest-profile murder case in the country. And now, more than 2 decades later, the case remains unsolved. But one man who has been connected to the case for years, Gary Oliva, was recorded on video by his high school classmate, Michael Vale, talking about JonBenét. Is Oliva being looked at, and what exactly is his connection to JonBenét? It's unusual. What we're showing you is very unusual. It's borderline strange. We're talking about a man in a motel room with a shrine to a little girl who is dead, a little girl who lived in a town that he lived at the time that she was murdered, a man who went back to the 1-year anniversary to pay tribute to JonBenét, or 1-week anniversary, returned to the scene. Was he the killer? He's not been named as a suspect, but he has said all these things that we're taking a look at and trying to figure out what it means. I'm going to show you now a piece of this conversation back and forth that was recorded. And here he is clearly denying that he took the life of JonBenét.
I think your average person thinks that somebody encountered the child, beat her up, strangled her. Jesus Christ, I just said all that. Inflicted harm. Oh my God, to such a beautiful thing. I'm sorry if there's any suspicion that I could ever or have anything. I would have already. I couldn't live with myself.
So that brings us to the next question in our investigation. It's about the words, but it's about the body language. What does Gary Oliva's body language reveal? Joining me, body language expert and author of the New York Times best-selling book, You Can't Lie to Me, Janine Driver, and clinical forensic psychologist, researcher, expert on violent crime, and author of The New Evil, Dr. Gary Brucato. All right, Dr. Gary Brucato, I want to get your reaction to that denial first, and then we're going to dive into all the body language.
Well, I would say that one of the things that I would be very interested to probe for if I were sitting in a room with this individual would be signs of sadism, because the one characteristic that would have to be present in an individual who was responsible for killing a child with a garrote and through bludgeoning and possible other torture would be sadism. You would certainly expect the person to be very driven by fantasy, and you would certainly expect the person to be somebody who would repetitively have done this, because that is not something one does one time, certainly not at the age you would have been at the time. And so I'd be looking for soft signs of that. What I think is going on here, although it's impossible to say from afar, is that a person with a diagnosed psychotic disorder goes in and out of periods of believing and not believing, I think potentially authentically, that he is not responsible or is responsible, or not responsible or is responsible. But what's complicated here is that there seems to be some kind of mixture of a psychotic disorder and other stuff, the kind of stuff that we tend to see in people with personality disorders who are capable of lying and manufacturing stories, or wanting fame, or wanting attention, or being obsessed with power and control over people. And so I think one would also have to take, because of the psychosis and because of those personality things, everything with a grain of salt that this person is saying. And it is plausible that the story would also change according to when it is or isn't convenient for certain facts to be true. So my sense would be that teasing those two things apart is essential, and I would definitely be probing for sadism and fantasy.
Okay, Janine Driver, the body language in that denial. What did you see? What did you notice? What's important?
Listen, I would not bet the house on killer. When he is talking about not being the killer, even when he flat out denies it over on the CBS interview, I don't know if we're going to look at that, he's being congruent with someone who's telling the truth. And I do think, I'm not a psychologist, but I think there's some type of stuff happening with this gentleman. But he indicates deception when he is holding something back. You know, when he's giving a hypothetical situation and he's talking about someone other than him, that's when he's showing deception. So there's a lot happening here, Vinny, and it doesn't look like, to me, he's the man who killed JonBenét Ramsey.
Okay. Janine, I want you to see this part now, because Michael Vale, who's recording this and asking the questions, here puts together a sort of a theory of what could have happened, and he's reacting to that. Let's watch.
I've got the perfect hypothetical. An intruder crept into the house, probably through an unlocked door even. However, they noticed the neighbors could see that door. So they go, we got to go out the basement window. And we're going to... Then he waited and waited, and he had all this time, and he went through all the drawers, and he found all this stuff and wrote a note, a ransom note for 3 pages, and then went upstairs to get her and waited for them all to fall asleep. Oh, because they got home late that night. I don't know.
Let's finish. I want to hear some music.
She probably went and stun gunned her in bed thinking that would quiet her, but it didn't work. It made her scream out, so she needed her duct tape around her mouth.
A neighbor claims she heard a
There you go.
Scream.
That's
a deathly scream, or something to that effect.
Probably like when you get a tased when you're asleep and suddenly you get tased. Then she was carried.
I don't want to do.
Oh, you don't want to
put
find
myself in the mindset.
All right, Janine, what are you seeing there?
I'm seeing and hearing a couple of things. We're seeing his eyes go in different spots. When his friend is laying out what Michael Vale, what he thinks might have happened, we see his eyes going to Gary's eyes going to his right, which is imagining, creating an answer. If he did the crime, if he killed JonBenét, it would be more likely he would be going to his left, which would be recall, would be like, yeah, dude, that's not how it happened. It happened like this. He's missing lots of details, Gary, with regard to what could have happened. There's a ton of things that happened. It wasn't just one note, and it wasn't just 3 ransom letters. It was multiple. You know, they literally have the pages where it's embedded. Someone sat there long enough to write multiple different copies of this ransom letter. Now, he also does some start-stop sentences, and this is not the only place he does it, Vinnie, and you at home. We saw this with all kinds of people. We saw this with Jussie Smollett and Elizabeth Holmes and Chris Watts and Casey Anthony all the way back in 2008. And Vinnie, I don't know if you remember I was on with Terry Sanderson. He sued Gwyneth Paltrow for $300K for a skiing accident. And we talked about these start-stop sentences then, and we have them here again. What this means is this is a man who's being very careful about what he says and what he doesn't say.
Okay, let me play a little bit more, Janine. This is interesting. Again, another piece of this conversation in this motel room right next to the altar/shrine to JonBenét.
I've gone through many scenarios in my head. I think something happened where she fell back and hit her head. Well, I know a private investigator covered up and everybody's freaking out, paranoid. Oh God, what is the neighbors going to think? And that right there, by saying that, implies that I think mom and pop, if you will, pardon me for using that terminology, were scheming together. Like, how can we cover this up? Oh God, we know what really, you know. That seems so. I don't even.
How about this part where he's talking about potential scenarios?
We see the same thing, Vinnie, and you at home. His eyes are going to the right, to the right, to the right. Upper right is visually creating an answer. He also goes to his ear to the right, which is auditorily creating an answer. And here, Mac Daddy start-stop sentences again. These are key indicators that he's withholding information, internal conflict, probably because he's telling his friend he did it, wrote him in a letter when he was in jail, dude, I did it, but it was an accident. But yet he most likely, I believe, didn't do it. This irregular speech pattern he has is an increase in your cognitive overload. It's like someone who gets busted because you have a girl's phone number in your pants and your girlfriend's like, who's Michelle? And you're like, well, last night, yesterday these start-stop sentences are him auditing and editing and gatekeeping what we're going to hear from him. This body language here is congruent with someone that has no clue with what actually went on. Why do I say that? Because if he was there, his eyes would be going off to the left. Hey, even Ted Bundy, eyes went to the left when recalling or when someone was telling what happened at a crime. We saw Ted Bundy's eyes go to the left, visually remembering what happened. We don't have it here. This is not our guy.
Dr. Gary Brucato, I want you to sort of tie this with a bow now, because we saw some more instances of him talking about potential scenarios, et cetera. What are your final thoughts on it?
Well, I think it's interesting that both Janine and I are basically picking up on two things in common, right? The idea that it really does seem, possibly because this man has a psychotic disorder, that he really believes what he is saying. And then at the same time, we're both picking up on the fact that there is some evasion where he seems to change what he says according to who's listening to him at the moment. And that, I think that is interesting that we both, from two different perspectives, pick that up. I think it's also very important to point out that the general public sometimes tends to minimize or not fully appreciate how common it is for people with psychotic disorders to sometimes take credit for crimes that they didn't commit. And that is something that has to be taken into consideration here. He would have to be evaluated for that, because a person can develop a delusional belief and insinuate themselves. And what we tend to see there is that the only details that they have, except ones that are totally bizarre, that are manufactured and easily shown to be wrong, are things that are publicly available information. And that's the other thing I think that would have to happen is he would have to know something that is not available in the literature on the case. So far, I don't see anything that you couldn't just pick up a book and learn. I certainly think, based on the basic profile one would have of this offense, that one would be looking for somebody who probably was an intruder with a history of offenses, and who was probably a kind of disorganized, weird guy, because people that are not disorganized and offend against children tend to be groomers that identify somebody and work them over for a long period of time. And this is the kind of thing we see where somebody doesn't have social skills and just breaks into a house and takes a kid or snatches them. So that I think you are looking for some oddball local that became preoccupied with this child. And I think that makes Gary Oliva very interesting.
Absolutely.
But there are some problems that I think would have to be overcome.
Gotcha. We're out of time for now.
Looking at him.
Dr. Gary Bucato, Janine Driver, thank you for your valuable time and your insight. When we come back, does the DNA clear Gary Oliva?
I believe that the case will be solved with DNA technology.
How we doing, guys? We're good? Okay.
You're on very shaky ground.
That is unreal.
People wanted answers, and people started locking their doors.
I did not do it to hurt anybody.
You know what it is. You know what you did, right?
Please hear me out. Please. This was a real-life soap opera. And I said, OJ, everybody thinks you're guilty.
I believe that the case will be solved with DNA technology. You know, Lou Smith, the legendary detective that was brought in to work on this case by the DA early on, out of retirement, told me, he said, this case will be solved by DNA, period. And that's really what I believe as well.
John Ramsey, who obviously has the most invested in all of this, believes that it's DNA. DNA is going to be the key here, using the new technology, having a different approach with the DNA. But let's not forget, Gary Oliva is a felon. His DNA is in the database, and there have been no connections made. So what does that mean? Brings me to my next question in our investigation, which is, does DNA clear Gary Oliva? I think if it's his DNA, there would have been a hit, right? Joining me in studio, childhood friend of Gary Oliva, the man who recorded all the videos you've been watching, Michael Vale, and private investigator, 20 years experience, more than 20 years, even though he looks young. He's followed the case for his nonprofit, the Cold Case Coalition, Jason Jensen. Okay, Jason, let me ask you. Does the DNA, there's no DNA hit, right? Like it's basic stuff. He's a felon, they've got his DNA, they tested it, doesn't match, so does that clear him?
That's the simple math, right? We would think that if that was suspect DNA, it would eliminate anybody that wasn't a match. But it's UM1, unknown male. And in the profile...
So you're saying that let's start here so we go piece by piece. So you're saying the DNA you don't believe is necessarily the actual suspect?
Correct. It doesn't have to be the suspect. It can be some form of evidence that was brought into the crime scene, and the DNA source is that piece of evidence. We know that there's several items that were brought into the home that were not attributed as being property of the Ramseys. The duct tape, for instance, did not match any tape in the home. The rope that was left in the spare bedroom, and the cord, the nylon cord that was used as the garrote around her wrists and her neck, none of that was part of the crimes, part of the Ramsey's home before the crime. So it was clearly an introduced items.
So you believe these items were brought into the house by the killer, the suspect?
Correct.
Okay, so what's the significance of that when it comes to DNA?
The significance is if there's a foreign item that there's DNA material on, and then that's touched and spread around either the victim or the scene, you're going to contaminate that room with that unknown DNA material. So
where could this stuff have come from?
Well, in my opinion, what I believe happened is if Gary was the one that did this, he was in the neighborhood working at a church nearby, the St. Aquinas Church, where he was doing maintenance work there. There was even information that he'd painted a mural in the groundskeeper's cottage. What's important about that is there was a paintbrush used as the handle on the garrote. If that paintbrush was actually from the Ramsey's home, there'd be Patsy's DNA or some other Ramsey DNA on the paintbrush. But there's UM1 on there. And there's UM1 on the waistband of JonBenét's long johns. And in the crotch that was cut out for testing of the underwear. So we know that UM1 is on multiple pieces of items in evidence in the crime scene, but we don't know whose DNA that is. If that is actually a paintbrush or DNA material from the church, I think it would be wise for Boulder to test those.
People from the church?
Correct.
People who would be innocent from the church but would have contact with items that, in your opinion, potentially Gary Oliva brought into the scene.
Correct.
Before we run out of time here, because we're going to run out of time quickly, a couple things I just wanted to sort of tie up. Big issues. Footprints in the snow. Big issue always in all of this. If it's Gary Oliva, an outsider coming in, wouldn't there have been footprints in the snow?
Right. Well, we know from recent productions on TV that there was no snow at the back of the house. That's where the access point through the basement window was. So if there's no snow, there's no footprints.
Okay, and I know they did talk about snow initially on the front lawn of the home. $118,000 was the ransom amount in this note. Where would Gary Oliva get that number from, and why would that be him? Or
John explains that very well. It was a bonus that he received in January of '96. So if he's, bi-monthly pay cycle, that would be a number listed on his pay stub 26 different times. So anybody going through the house rummaging and finds a pay stub and sees that,
could then put that together and it would have John's name on it as well.
Correct.
All right, we're out of time. Michael Vale, thank you so much for sharing this video with us. I think it's eye-opening. I think it's important. The investigation is continuing. Stay safe. Jason Jensen, always a pleasure to have you on the show, and great to have you here in studio with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, folks. The best part of DNA is that it can put someone at the scene of a crime or connect someone to a weapon or an object. What it can't do, though, is tell you when that contact was made and exactly under what circumstances. That's why DNA can be powerful, but like all evidence, needs to be considered in the context of all the other evidence. That's how cases get solved. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.